Hey guys, this is part 2 for my Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone analysis. I originally wanted it to be one part, but I just shot way too much content, so it's going to be 2. Here's the second part. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about character development throughout the book. First, I'm going to start with Harry. So, Harry's kind of interesting because I think he's such a strong person from the start of the series that I don't know. It's almost more difficult to diagnose what his character arcs would be. There were a couple that I kind of decided on. So from the start, Harry stands up for what he believes is right and does things that really kind of establish who he is when he first meets Malfoy and decides to become friends with Ron instead. And when he chooses Gryffindor and avoids Slytherin, they're kind of just events in the book that show what his character is like from the start. And so I don't think for him, his character arc isn't necessarily becoming brave or something about proving himself as much, because that's just who he is from the start, I think. But I think kind of the major character development for Harry is he really starts off in the books as being alone and kind of a victim of the Dursleys, and I think this kind of flips because at the end of the book he's not alone. He's developed this family of his friends and different figures in his life, and he's also no longer the victim. He's the victor. Yeah, so this kind of progression I think comes as he develops friendship and gains the family that he lost. So when he, for example, looks in the mirror of Erised? That mirror thing that's in it. When he looks in it and sees his family, I think is a key part of it, because then Dumbledore kind of advises him. He's well, I don't know if he tells him to stop looking in it, but he pretty much is the mirror isn't going to be there anymore. So you shouldn't be just sitting around wishing your family was still there. But what's important is that Harry really develops a family, and he gains these father figures in Dumbledore and Mr. Weasley, and kind of some weird mother figures in McGonagall and Mrs. Weasley, and siblings in Hermione and Ron and the rest of the Weasleys. They kind of fill that void for him. So I wouldn't say that those things happening are necessarily his character progressing, but I think his ability to move on, not being a victim and not feeling so alone, I think are two ways that Harry's character progresses throughout the book. Next, Ron. I think Ron's biggest thing is he kind of goes from selfish to being very selfless in his move in the chess game, and how he kind of saves the day through that. Normally he's just kind of lazy and rude, but I think he becomes kind of a Samwise Gamgee type character, who kind of ends up doing a lot of the work and the final push of the journey, to save the day and stuff. So yeah, kind of selfishness and laziness to taking action and being selfless. Okay, so next to Hermione. So I think Hermione's main character development throughout the first book is going from kind of a rule follower to, I don't want to say a rule breaker, but someone who's willing to go against the rules, because I think she kind of learns that if a rule is not worth abiding by, then it might have to be broken, and she kind of learns to let go of the control that she finds from adhering to all the rules. And kind of the last character that I wanted to talk about progressing is Neville. I think he isn't talked about a ton in the first book, but he ends up standing up to his friends and keeping them from leaving, like when they're all trying to go back and stop Snape, which I guess it doesn't end up being Snape. But anyway, when they're trying to leave, he stands up to them and he's like, "I won't let you do it. I'll fight you. Don't call me an idiot. Blah, blah, blah. I don't think you should be breaking any more rules. And you're the only one who told me to stand up to people." So like Neville is this kind of character who just gets like walked on and like made fun of for honestly like all the books. Well, so far, obviously I haven't read all of them, at least in the movies. That's kind of how he is. But he really takes responsibility and finally like stands up to someone, which I think shows some progression in his character in the book. So now I'm going to talk about some main themes, motifs, and symbols throughout the book. I actually found a lot of good stuff on SparkNotes about these, which is funny because like SparkNotes used to be something that I was like, oh, only cheaters read that because they don't actually do the reading. But it was really helpful in seeing some of the stuff that they had about different like themes, for example. Some of the stuff I'm taking from there. So for example, one of the themes is value of humility. And you kind of see this showcased in Harry, and it ends up being kind of the key to him getting the stone over Voldemort, because he is not like looking for like fame and fortune and all of that. He just wants to do what's right, so that's why he can end up with the stone. A good quote from SparkNotes on this was, "Harry's humility is no doubt ingrained in him during his 10 miserable years of neglect and cruelty with the Dursleys. But Harry does not stop being humble when he gains fame, wealth, and popularity at Hogwarts." So I just thought that was a good quote and kind of summed up that theme well. It carries the message of like people can suffer through adversity and still end up being the bigger man in the end, which I thought was just a really good and positive message. Another message that kind of pops up throughout the book is like rebellion and like needing to sometimes break the rules, especially with Hermione, but also with Harry when he ends up like exploring the third floor corridor and looking in the restricted section. That was a big one with his invisibility cloak, and when he flies on the broom to get back the Remembrall from Draco. Kind of these instances of like, okay, there's a definite rule against that, and he's like doing the wrong thing to break that rule, but like, do the ends justify the means of him doing that? Which is a pretty like interesting and kind of complicated lesson for like a kid's book, which I don't know if it should be teaching kids to like break the rules, but it definitely gives some interesting and probably pretty relatable scenarios for kids to think about, or adults to think about if you're going back and reading it, like me. Another example of this is when they're dealing with the whole dragon situation from Hagrid. They end up breaking the rules to like help him deal with the dragon, which is kind of a ridiculous whole scene anyway. But it was like they kind of took the fall for the bad stuff that Hagrid had done. So it's like, okay, is this situation, are they doing the right thing because they're helping a friend, or is it like bad because it broke the rules? the issue with that is like there are obviously ways that they could have done it that wouldn't have broken rules, but we'll get to that. Ooh, another good theme that I got from SparkNotes was the dangers of desire theme. So this is kind of established with like Dudley and his ridiculous number of gifts and that sort of thing. But then it's also seen like in a more sinister way through Voldemort, and there are these different characters who are just very greedy. Then Harry's also kind of dealing with it too, as he is looking in the mirror and like seeing what he most desires in life. But I guess the point that SparkNotes was making was that like desires aren't necessarily all like bad. Like there are definitely good desires. It says Dumbledore himself illustrates the power and grandeur of one who has renounced desires almost completely when he says that all he wants is a pair of warm socks when he looks in the mirror. It says this restraint is the model for Harry's own development in the story. So just some good lessons and some good themes that kind of the first book deals with, and I think could be good kind of lessons for kids or even adults to be thinking about. My chair is squeaky. Okay, after themes, we've got motifs. So a motif is... Oh, did I say what themes were? Yeah, themes are like kind of underlying messages or ideas. Motifs are a recurring image, idea, or symbol that develops the theme. So themes are kind of made up of motifs almost. So some interesting motifs throughout the book were kind of like muggles versus magical folk and authority. The muggles versus magical folk is pretty interesting because they're saying in SparkNotes that it's almost like a parallel to like eugenics, even like Hitler and the Holocaust and that sort of thing, because it's like this struggle for like certain people believing that they're like superior to others, and I thought that was just an interesting thing to think about, and like an interesting parallel. And then another motif that I also got from SparkNotes, they're just killing it, what can I say, is authority. And so they said by the end of the story, Dumbledore emerges as the true authority figure. Dumbledore has immense power but does not use it. When he wants Harry to stop visiting the mirror of Erised, yeah. He recommends that Harry stop going instead of ordering him to stop. It's saying that like his authority is based on wisdom and kindness instead of power. And so yeah, it just gives an interesting contrast to like the Dursleys just being kind of awful adults, and I guess what really makes you a good authority figure. And I thought it was something interesting to think about as like a young adult kind of moving into adulthood. Like, what do you want your authority to look like over people who are like younger or in a position underneath you? Just an interesting thought. Yeah, I think we're just gonna skip over symbols. There's some interesting ones, but for the sake of time, we're just gonna ditch it.